Hello and welcome back. We continue our Nullitaire playthrough of Liberty or Death. And once again, Nullitaire here means we're playing with 0 players. In other words, we're playing all of the bots against each other. So we're probably, about halfway through the game at this point. We're in the middle of the 3rd year, so it's 1778. And this is the shape of the board right now. The story of this game has been support, which is way higher than opposition. And but the rebellion has been holding their own on the other side of the victory conditions. The patriots have been winning the forts versus villages race, and the French have been winning the cumulative casualties race. So it's not exactly as though any faction is running away with the game or anything like that. All right, let's continue on. The next card is Jay McCrae, murdered by Indians. The Indians are first eligible. Their side of the event says Indian country fears. Remove 1 Patriot fort from 1 Indian Reserve province. And there is a Patriot fort in an Indian Reserve province up there in Quebec. And the Indians definitely will take this event. The 3rd bullet point, event removes a Patriot fort. Yep, sure does. Okay, so the Indians will take the event to remove that fort from Quebec. The French are up next, and they can take a full command and special activity. So following their flow chart, French resources greater than 0, yes, they are at 9. The Treaty of Alliance has been played. 1d6 less than the available French regulars. Well, there are 4 French regulars available, so they had to roll on that, and they rolled a 2. So the answer is yes, 2 is less than 4. So they're going to muster. In 1 space with rebel control or the West Indies, if fewer than 4 French regulars are available, that's not the case because there are 4 available, and West Indies is not rebel controlled. That's also not the case because it is rebel controlled. So we skip that bullet point. Next bullet point. Otherwise, muster first in a colony or city with continentals, then elsewhere. Well, there are 2 choices here then. There are continentals in New York and there are continentals in Massachusetts. And since we're given no priorities for choosing between them, FrenchBot will choose randomly between those 2. FrenchBot rolls a 2-2. So when we go to the random spaces, we find that leads us to Massachusetts. So FrenchBot will spend 2 resources to muster in Massachusetts and place 4 regulars there. That's all that FrenchBot is going to do with muster. So now they're going to look for a special activity. They'd like to skirmish, but the problem with that is that skirmish requires a space or the West Indies with French regulars and British pieces, and no battle or muster in the space. Well, there aren't any spaces with French regulars and British pieces. All the French regulars are in New York, Massachusetts, and in the West Indies, and there are no British pieces in any of those spaces. All right, so they're not going to skirmish. They're instead going to use préparer la guerre. So this says, if a d6 is less than or equal to unavailable French regulars and blockades, move 1 blockade to the West Indies. Or if none, move up to 3 regulars from unavailable to available. Well, the thing is, all of the blockades are in the West Indies, and there aren't any French pieces unavailable. They've all been made available. So none of that is relevant. So the last part of this comes into effect. If no regulars or blockades moved and French resources equals 0, add 2 French resources. Well, no regulars or blockades are moved, but French resources are not at 0. They are at 7. So it turns out the French bot is not going to use this special activity either. They're going to use naval pressure. Okay, and so naval pressure, we raise F and I 1 level and move a blockade into a city. All right, so let's see where they put their blockade. So we add a blockade, first in a city, selected for battle, then at most support. Well, there was no battle this time, so that's not an issue. So they're going to go for the most support, and clearly the city with the most support is New York, because it's adding 4 total support. Okay, so F&I is going to go up 1 level. A French squadron will come out of the West Indies and become a blockade in New York City, and that will neutralize 4 support. So as before, when I place blockade markers, I put them on top of the support marker there, just as a visual reminder to me that that support is not being counted toward total support. Okay, so total support is now down to 28. Okay, so that's the end of the French player's turn. We go on to the next card. The next card is If It Hadn't Been So Foggy, and the British are first eligible. We see the muskets all across the top there, so we need to check the special instructions for this card. The event says fog allows disengagement. Select one faction. Move any own units sharing a space with that faction to adjacent spaces. Okay, so this basically allows a kind of retreat, an easy retreat. Well, looking at the British bots' special instructions here, if it hadn't been so foggy, it says, select a space shared with an enemy faction, then move per the march instructions from that origin. So enemy faction here means either of the rebel factions, either the French or the Patriots. Well, there aren't any spaces that the British share with any of those pieces. All of the rebels are in New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, and the West Indies. And there are no British pieces in any of those spaces. Well, there's a militia down here too, in the Southwest. But anyway, that's where all of the rebel pieces are, and there are no British in any of those spaces. Okay, so this is an ineffective event. The British are not going to select it. All right, so moving down the flow chart then. British resources greater than 0. Yes, they're at 9. 10 or more British regulars on the map. And rebels control a city without a rebel fort. No, the rebels don't control any cities. Available British regulars greater than a D6. No, there are no British regulars available. 2 or more active rebels in a space outnumbered by British regulars and leader. Again, no, there are no spaces with rebels and British regulars. So, the British would like to march. Now, we need to be a little more careful than usual with march because we have a blockaded city. And that means that the British can't simply march wherever they want to. When there are no blockaded cities, the British can march from any city or colony to any other city or colony. But when there's a blockaded city, things are a little bit different. So looking at the march command, it says move any British regulars onto an adjacent space, or if moving units are in or adjacent to a city not blockaded, to another city not blockaded or a province adjacent to it. Tories may only accompany through the entire process British regulars 1 for 1. Activate 1 militia for every 3 British cubes there. So what that means in effect is that New York City's off limits for marching in or out of, and any colony adjacent to it that isn't adjacent to some other non-blockaded city is also off limits. So that means New York Colony is also off limits for marching into or out of. Okay. New Jersey is also adjacent to New York City, so it seems like it would be off limits, but it isn't because it's also adjacent to Philadelphia. So the British could march into New Jersey through Philadelphia rather than through New York City. Okay, so the only 2 spaces off limits for this march are New York City and New York Colony. Every other space is acceptable. All right, so now let's see how the march will proceed. Lose no British control. Leave last Tory and War Party in each space, and last regular if British control but no active support. All right, so once again, I'm going to mark all of the pieces that can move according to that restriction, and then we'll see where they go. So now I've marked every piece that can move with pawns. And we'll see where they go. So, second bullet point. Moving the largest groups first. Add British control to up to 2 cities, then colonies. Within each, first where rebel cubes, then highest population. Use common cause to increase group size if destination is adjacent province. All right, they're not going to use common cause here because there are no war parties with those units. All right, so we're going to move the largest group first, and up to 2 cities, then colonies. Well, all the cities are already British control, so they're not going to choose any cities. They're going to look for colonies, first where there are rebel cubes. Okay, well, there's 2 spaces with rebel cubes, New York and Massachusetts. But like I said, they cannot choose New York because of the blockade in New York City. There's no way to access New York colony. You know, Quebec City is not quite adjacent to New York. Okay, so they're clearly going to choose Massachusetts here. They can march there through Boston. And we move the largest group first. The largest group is up there in Quebec City. So the first march will be all of those regulars up in Quebec City, -1. We have to leave 1 behind to maintain control. We'll march into Massachusetts to take control of that space. So once again, the British march into Massachusetts and take control of that space. Carrying on with the march command here. So we're still in the second bullet point. It says moving the largest groups first. Add British control in up to 2 cities, then colonies. Okay, so we can select another one here. Within each first were rebel cubes. Well, they've selected the only space with rebel cubes they can get to. So the next priority is highest population. Okay, so the next largest group that can move is this group of regulars in Norfolk with Howe. And they'd like to choose a colony that's the highest population where they could add control. Well, that narrows the choices down to either Virginia or Maryland, Delaware, which are 2 population spaces where they could take control. Right. There are no cubes up in New Hampshire, so interestingly, they ignore that. Seems like that would be a good place to march, try to destroy some forts, but they don't. Okay, because the first priority says first where rebel cubes, doesn't say anything about forts. Then highest population. And New Hampshire's a 1 population space, so they wouldn't choose that. They'd rather go to one of these 2 population spaces. All right, so they rolled on that. They rolled a 2-1, which, following it down, gets them to Maryland, Delaware first. So those 6 regulars, along with Howe, are going to move from Norfolk into Maryland, Delaware. So they selected 2 colonies now for the second bullet point of March. And it tells us in up to 2 cities or colonies, so then we move on. Third bullet point, then march to population 1+ spaces not at active support. First to add Tories where regulars are the only British units. Well, there are no Tories that can move right now, so we move on. Then to add regulars where Tories are the only British units within each first and the above destinations. All right, so we look for a space that's population 1 or more, so not an Indian reserve, or that's not at active support. And we want to add regulars where Tories are the only British units. Well, there's only one space like that, and that's Philadelphia. So there's just Tories there, and they're not at active support. So the British would like to get some regulars in there to start rewarding loyalty to knock down that opposition. Well, there are 2 regulars that can move right now, the one in North Carolina and the one in Charlestown. So they'll have to choose randomly between those 2. They rolled a 6-1, which when we follow it along gives us Charlestown first. So they will move this 1 regular from Charlestown into Philadelphia. All the other spaces on the board with Tories with no British regulars are already at active support. So there's nothing more they want to do with that third bullet point. So moving on to the fourth bullet point. And by the way, there's a maximum of 4 for British bots, so they can select another space here. The fourth bullet point, then march in place to activate underground militia. Well, there are no militia together with any of the British, so they're not going to do that. If no common cause used, execute special activity. Okay, so they're not going to choose another space. They're going to move on to their special activity. But of course, we have to remember, since how is their leader, how special capability says, before executing a British special activity, first lower F&I one level. So F&I is going to go down one level, and that will remove that blockade from New York City. So now let's see what the special activity will be. So from the March command, we get first common cause, but they didn't use common cause for the March command. So we carry on from there. So they'd like to skirmish. So looking at the skirmish command, it says the location is one space or West Indies with British regulars and rebellion pieces and no battle garrison or muster in the space. Well, they marched this turn, so there's no worry about battle garrison or muster. But the only space on the map that has British regulars and rebellion pieces is Massachusetts. So if they're going to skirmish, it's got to be there. There's no other possible location. So let's see what the priorities say. First in the West Indies, well, no, there's no British pieces there. Then where exactly one British regular? No, there's lots of British regulars in Massachusetts. Then per below. Okay, we'll go per below then. Remove as many rebel cubes as possible. First, whichever type is least in the space, removing one British regular if necessary. All right, so in Massachusetts, what that will mean is they're going to target the Patriot pieces. There's two of them compared to the 5 French. And skirmish says, and they want to move them. They want to remove the maximum possible. So the second part of the procedure is going to come into play. Remove 2 rebellion cubes and 1 British regular. And of course, I have to remember, cubes and forts are removed to casualties. Don't mess that up. It causes some problems. All right, so British bot will use skirmish to remove 2 Continentals from Massachusetts, and they'll also remove one of their own regulars, and those will go to casualties. So that moves cumulative casualties up slightly. The British are, well, the rebellion is still doing slightly better than the British in that regard. All right, so the British took a full command of special activity, so the Patriots are up next. They could take the event or a limited command. Once again, the event says, select one faction, move any own units sharing a space with that faction to adjacent spaces. And of course, we have all the muskets across the top. So we have to look at the Patriots' special instructions for this card as well, if it hadn't been so foggy. Select a space shared with an enemy faction, then move per the march instructions from that origin. Well, looking at the board, there's actually only one space on the map where this event could actually be used. You know, there were 2 Patriot units in Massachusetts, but the British skirmish took care of that in the last turn. So there are no units there. Forts don't count as units. Obviously, you can't you can't march a fort. All right, all the other Patriot units are there in New York, where there are no enemies. And there's this one militia down here in the Southwest. So that's the only piece that could actually be affected by this event. So let's see. You know, the special instructions tell us to use the march instructions if they're going to take this. But we still need to find out whether or not they're even going to take this event. So the event or command space. Support greater than opposition, and event shifts support opposition in rebel favor. No, it doesn't do any of that. Event places underground militia in at least one active support or village space with none. No, because this militia is activated, and you know, marching it into an adjacent space won't change that. So no to that. Event places a Patriot fort or removes an Indian village. No. Event adds 3 or more Patriot resources. No. Event is effective. Patriots have 25 or more pieces on the map, and a d6 rolls of 5 or better. Well, the Patriots only have 20 pieces on the map. So the answer to that is no. Okay, so they're not going to take the event. Instead, they're going to look for a limited command for this turn. All right, Patriot resources greater than 0. Yes, they are way up at 17. Rebel cubes and leader greater than active royalist pieces in a space with both. Well, the only space that has both royalist pieces and rebel cubes is Massachusetts. There aren't any Patriot cubes there, but there are Patriot forts, so this is a space that the Patriots could choose for battle if they wanted to. But clearly they're outnumbered there, so they would not select that space to initiate a battle. All right, so the answer to that is no. Raleigh would place a fort. Well, yeah. In New York. Remember before that they couldn't rally in New York because it was at active support, but they've since neutralized that somewhat. Now it's at passive support, and so they can do a rally. Rally requires a space without active support. So now they can rally there. So they're going to replace 2 units with a fort in New York, and that will be their limited command. Except that there's more to rally. We have to remember that. It's possible to do more with rally in a single space than just put in a fort. So we have to remember that. The last part of rally says, if desired, replace any militia in any one space containing a fort with continentals. So that's something that the Patriots could also do in New York. So carrying on with the rally command here, we put the fort in, so that's the first bullet point. The second point is then place militia. Well, they can't choose any other spaces, so they can't place any militia. So the third bullet point, in the Patriot fort space with the most militia of those already selected for rally, replace all militia except 1 underground with continentals. Okay, so Patriot Bot is also going to do that in New York. They'll replace all of those militia except they'll leave 1 underground militia and put in continentals. So that'll be 7 continentals that'll go in there. That's all the Patriots can do with rally in a single space. So with their limited command, they build a fort and train up some continentals. Okay, on to the next card. The next card is Admiral Pierre-André de Suffren, and the French are first available. Their side of the event says squadron isolation strategy has great success. Raise FNI 1 level, French resources +3. So looking at the French bot's event or command box, they are going to take this event for 2 reasons, really. The first bullet point, support is greater than opposition, which it is by a long shot. An event shifts support opposition in rebel favor. Well, if you place a blockade in a city that has support, then that does shift total support down. So that would be in the rebel favor. So that's one reason to take it. And the 5th bullet point, event adds French resources. It does that too. So 2 reasons to take this event. So the British will take the event. They'll raise FNI 1 level, which will add a blockade to a city, and they will gain 3 resources. I said in an earlier video that when French naval intervention goes up or down by an event card, we're not given any specific priorities from the French bot or from the British bot. They don't say anything particular about where to place the blockade. But I suggested earlier, and I think it's still true, that in a case like this, from the rulebook, 8.3.6, events that shift support or opposition, comes into play. Because this is an event that shifts support or opposition. When you place a blockade in a city, that shifts, that neutralizes all of the support in that city. It's not counted for total support. Okay, so I intend to continue using these priorities. So it says rebellion factions for the highest gain in opposition, then the highest loss in support. So that says to me that the French will take their squadron and place it as a blockade in the city that will have the greatest impact on support, and of course that's New York City. So they're going to blockade New York City once again. So once again, that neutralizes that support in New York City. I've placed it under the blockade marker there. Just in case that blockade moves, that support comes right back. That moves total support down once again to 28. And the French also gained 3 resources for this event. That brought them up to 10. Okay, the next available faction is the Indians, and they can take a full command in special activity. So looking at the Indian flow chart, support plus a D6 is greater than opposition. Well, again, support is way higher than opposition, so the D6 is irrelevant. The answer is yes. Gather would place 2 or more villages. No, there are no spaces right now where any villages could be placed. Or a D6 is less than the available war parties. There are 5 available war parties right now, so the Indians had to roll on that, and they rolled a 3. So the answer is yes. 3 is less than 5. So they're going to gather. Place villages where room and 3 or more war parties, first with Indian leader. Well, like I said, there are no spaces where they can place villages right now. So the next bullet point, then place war parties at villages. Okay, so they can do that. First, where enemies, well, the only village space with enemies is the southwest. So they're going to start there. So they'll place the maximum number of war parties there, which is 3. 1 plus the number of villages. And this won't cost them anything because this is the first Indian province, which is free with gather. Okay, so that's the first thing they'll do. They'll place 3 war parties in the southwest for free. It's still possible for them to place war parties at villages up here in the northwest, so they'll continue on with this same bullet point. So first where enemies, then where no underground war parties. Well, there are underground war parties in the northwest. But then it says then with Indian leader. Okay, well, the Indian leader is there. So they are going to select this space to gather. They only have 2 war parties left, so they can't place the full 3, but they'll put the 2 they have in there. This will cost them 1 resource because they've already used their free gather. They can choose up to 4 spaces for gather, maximum 4. So let's carry on. They can't place any more war parties, so we're done with the second bullet point. Third bullet point, if any village is available, yes there are. Place war parties, can't place any war parties. So they can't do that one. On to the next bullet point. Then if no more war parties are available, yeah, there aren't any more. In 1 village space, move in all adjacent war parties possible without adding any rebel control, then flip them underground. Well, the problem is they've already selected for gather every space that has an Indian village. So it turns out they can't do this part either. So that's the end of the gather command for them. They now look for a special activity. Indians would like to use warpath, and they do have some resources, so they can do this instead of trading. So it says warpath. First, to remove a patriot fort, then most rebel pieces within that first in a province with 1 or more villages, then elsewhere. Well, warpath requires a space with underground war parties and rebellion pieces. There's only 1 such space on the map, and that's the southwest. There's that 1 militia there. So they will use warpath there. And so the first part of the procedure comes into play. Activate 1 underground war party and remove 1 rebellion unit. So that's all that's going to happen here. Okay, so that's the maximum rebel pieces they could remove. So Indian bot will use warpath in the southwest. They'll activate 1 war party and remove that militia. The next card is Comte d'Orvilliers, builds a fleet at Brest. The British are first eligible, and their side of the event says British are prepared. Lower FNI 2 levels, French resources -4. So that would basically undo the last event for the French. Okay, but it turns out that the British aren't going to take this. Looking at their event or command space, first bullet point, opposition greater than support, and event shifts support opposition in royalist favor, including by removing a blockade. This would remove a blockade. Lowering FNI removes blockades. But opposition is not greater than support. Support is way higher than opposition. So the British feel pretty comfortable with that, and so they'll leave the blockade, at least by that priority. Second point, event places British pieces from unavailable. No. Event places Tories in active opposition with none, British fort and colony with none, or British regulars in city or colony. No. Event inflicts rebel casualties. No. So the last bullet point is the only one that could possibly matter here. British control 5 or more cities. Yes. The event is effective. Yes. The D6 rolls of 5 or better. No. Okay. So they're not going to take the event. British resources greater than 0. Yes, they are at 6. 10 or more British regulars on map, and rebels control a city without a rebel fort. No, the rebels don't control any cities. Available British regulars greater than a D6? No, there are no available British regulars. 2 or more active rebels in a space outnumbered by British regulars and leader. Yes, Massachusetts is such a space. There are 7 active rebellion pieces. Forts count as active. Compared to 12 British regulars. So we're going to see a battle in Massachusetts. It says, select all spaces, or the West Indies, with rebel forts and or rebel cubes, where royalist force level plus modifiers exceeds rebel force level plus modifiers. First, where the most British use common cause to increase British force level. All right, well, the only space that they could possibly select for this would be Massachusetts. They need a space over the West Indies with British and rebellion pieces, and that's the only space with British and rebellion pieces. The West Indies only has rebellion pieces. And the only other rebellion pieces on the map are in New York and New Hampshire. And there are no British regulars there. Okay, so Massachusetts is the only possible space. So I did the math here for Massachusetts just to be sure that it is a space they will select. So they choose a space where the royalist force level plus modifiers exceeds the rebel force level plus modifiers. So we need to consider the modifiers. So it turns out that the French get some pretty good modifiers. Well, the French and the Patriots here get pretty good modifiers. So they end up with a total of 10, their force level plus those modifiers. And the British end up with 12. So it's 12 to 10. The British are still winning, still have a higher number there, so they will select this space for battle. Okay, but we need to do this the right way. If we carry on with the battle procedure here, the second bullet point. So the first bullet point just told us to select the spaces. It didn't tell us to actually do the battle yet. The second bullet point, if no common cause was used, no, because there are no Indian war parties in that space. Execute skirmish or naval pressure per the flow chart. Then resolve all battles. Okay, so British bot is going to do their special activity first, and then they'll do the battle. Okay, so we have to figure that out first. They're not going to use common cause, so they'd like to skirmish instead. But wait, we have to remember, before the British use a special activity, we have to consider how. Whose special capability says, before executing a British special activity, first lower F&I 1 level. So that's going to happen first. F&I will go down 1 level, which means that blockade, once again, gets removed from New York City. So the British would like to skirmish, but it turns out they can't. So it says, in one space not selected for battle or muster, nor as a garrison destination. Well, Massachusetts has already been selected for battle, even though the battle hasn't taken place there. It's been selected. So they don't want to use skirmish there. If they use skirmish there, then they won't be able to battle there, okay? Because skirmish says location, one space or West Indies with British regulars and rebellion pieces, and no battle or garrison or muster in the space. So if they skirmish in Massachusetts, they won't be able to battle there. Okay, well, it turns out there's no other space on the board that has British regulars and rebellion pieces. So they can't skirmish after all. Okay, so they'd like to use naval pressure instead. Well, there are no blockades to remove because Howe's special capability just removed the last blockade. So instead, because F&I equals 0, they'll just add 1d3 British resources. So they rolled on that and they got a 2. So they'll collect 2 resources before doing the battle. So now it's time to do the Battle of Massachusetts. So the force level here for the Royalists turns out to be 12, counting all of their British regulars in that space, so that's 12. Therefore, they get to roll their maximum 3 dice. 12 divided by 3 is 4, but the max is 3, so they'll roll 3 dice. The defenders have a force level of 7, all the cubes plus the forts. 5 cubes plus 2 forts is 7. So they'll get to roll 2 dice, divided by 3 rounding down. All right, well, I already rolled on that, and the rebels did very, very well. They maxed out at 6, but the British did pretty well too. So it turned out 7 for the British and 6 for the Patriots. Okay, so now we need to consider the additional loss level modifiers to see what gets removed. So let's do the defender loss levels first. We'll see what the rebellion has to lose here. So the British rolled a 7 to start with. At least half of their attacking cubes are regular, yes. That's 8. At least 1 attacking side piece underground, no. At least 1 attacking leader, no. Attacking including French with Lausanne, no. British attacking a blockaded city, no. British attacking West Indies, no. Per defending fort, well, there are 2 defending forts. So that 7 gets dropped down to, the 8 gets dropped down to 6. Okay, Indians defending an Indian reserve, no. Patriots or French defending with Washington, no. All right, so the defender, that is to say the rebellion, has to suffer 6 losses. The removal priorities begin with the French regulars, which count as 2 losses each, and they go to casualties. So that means that the French will lose 3 regulars in this battle, and they will go to casualties. Okay, let's look at the other side. The rebellion, they rolled a 6, and we'll see their loss level modifiers. At least half defending cubes are regulars, yes. So that's now 7. At least one, excuse me. At least 1 defending side piece underground, no. At least 1 defending leader, no. British defending, no. British defending, no. Per defending fort, yes, there are 2 forts. So that adds another 2. So that's 9 total. Okay, well, looking at Royalists, obviously they only have British regulars to lose, and British regulars count for 2 each. So that means they're going to have to lose 5. So all those casualties move the cumulative casualties up. Cumulative British casualties are now at 10, and the rebellion casualties are at 7. Okay. And obviously the rebellion is the winner of this battle. They came out better. And really the story of that battle is those forts. Man, those forts were amazing. I mean, because those forts were there, the rebellion was able to roll an additional die, which again, they maxed out on, rolling 3 on both of their dice. And those forts both reduced the defender loss level by 2 and increased the attacker loss level by 2. So that was quite a shift in the battle for having those 2 forts there. Okay, well, now we have to consider win the day, because the rebellion is the winner here, and the loser did remove a cube or fort and 2 or more pieces. So that means that the rebellion gets to shift support or opposition by half the number of pieces lost by the loser. Well, there were 5 pieces lost, half of that 2.5, round that down to 2. Okay, so that means the rebellion gets to shift the space 2 toward opposition. Well, it's already maxed. But one thing that bothers me about win the day here on this handout is on this fold out, is that it doesn't list everything. And there is some more space here. They really could have put more information here. Okay, but going to the rule book, we're told that if all shifts are not possible in the battle space, British, if Royalist winner, or Patriots, if Rebellion winner, may use remaining shifts in adjacent spaces. Okay, so the Patriots get to use the 2 shifts in toward opposition in adjacent spaces. So they could choose New York, they could choose Connecticut, Rhode Island, or they could choose Boston to do this. Remembering that Washington's leader capability says double rebellion win the day, shift in the space, -1 to defender loss level when rebellion defending in the space. I thought, well, it seems like the Patriots would choose New York because Washington is sitting there and he doubles win the day shifts in the space. That is to say, in the space where he is. So it seems like they would choose that space and shift it all the way to active opposition. But I had to think on that. It really kind of depends on when you do the calculation for win the day. If the calculation is done, right after the battle in that space, in Massachusetts in this case, and then the total number is figured and then it spills out into adjacent spaces if there's no more room to shift in that space, well, then the doubling would have to occur first. It would have to that would mean Washington would have to be involved in the actual battle in order to double win the day. But on the other hand, if we just figure what the shift is, and then when it manages to spill over into an adjacent space, if Washington happens to be there, then he'll double whatever shift happens there. And the way this is written really doesn't, leaves open that ambiguity. It just says, double the win the day shift in the space. Okay. So I was, a little confused about that. I didn't know which way that should go, and I looked through the rule book and I couldn't really find anything. And so I looked at the official errata, which I have a copy of here. This is, by the way, a document that puts together all the errata from. I think I stapled this incorrectly. Okay, yeah, here's the front page. All the errata up to March 1st, 2016. And as far as I know, this is the most updated. I don't think anything's been added to the errata since then. You can find this on Board Game Geek, by the way. Okay. And by the way, it's also worth noting that I have the second printing of the game. So most of this errata is, or probably all of it really, is included in my copy. But I do want to point out something that I found here, which is right here, page 7, section 1.10, Washington's leader capability. It says double rebellion win the day in the space. Double the shift of support opposition in the battle space earned by the rebellion, but does not double Patriots may free rally in any one eligible space, and French may move any blockades from the battle city to another city. Now that's really giving us a clarification on whether or not Washington's leader capability would double the Patriot free rally or the French moving blockades. And it clarifies that it doesn't do that. But I think sort of accidentally, they also clarified this other point, which is that it says the battle space. So if you read this literally, double the shift of support opposition in the battle space. So I think that clarifies it for me. That tells me that the double of shift and support only happens when Washington is in the battle space. And in this case, he's not in the battle space. He's in an adjacent space. And so I don't think that the shift here, when it leaks over into New York, suddenly gets doubled because Washington's in that space. I think the point is supposed to be, that if Washington leads the rebellion forces, then, and is the winner and wins the day, then that is such a glorious event and is so inspiring to the colonists that it doubles the win the day in the battle space. But I don't think it's intended to mean, if Washington happens to be hanging around nearby and the rebellion wins the battle, that will be as inspiring to the colonists. Okay, so that's the way I'm going to read it. I think that Washington doesn't double the win the day shift over there in New York. All right. It also turns out that there are no priorities given by PatriotBot for selecting adjacent spaces for the spillover of shifting opposition. So they're going to choose randomly between these three spaces: New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Boston. They rolled a 2-1, which is on the nose, New York. Okay, so the two shifts in opposition are going to happen there in New York. it will go from passive support to passive opposition. Another thing that's not listed here on the player aid for win the day, and again, I find this rather annoying, but if the rebellion is the winner, Patriots may free rally in any one eligible space, and French may move any blockades from the battle city to another city. Well, this battle wasn't in a city, and there aren't any blockades anyway, so we can ignore that second part. But the Patriots do get to free rally in any one eligible space. All right, well, rally has to be done in any space without active support. So any space without active support is an eligible space. Okay, and since this is a free rally, we use PatriotBot's rally priorities. So it says, place a fort in each space with 4 or more Patriot units and room. First in cities within that and highest population. Well, looky there. New York, yet again, there's room for a fort there, and they've got another fort available. So it looks like they're going to use rally, their free rally here, to place a new fort there in New York. And that's all they can do with rally in New York. They could potentially replace that militia with a continental, but they don't want to do that because their priorities say, replace all militia except one underground. Okay, so they don't want to replace that one underground militia. They want to leave it there. All right, well, this battle was quite the disaster for the British. I mean, this has just been a real catastrophe for them. They initiated the battle, so they actually had to pay for it. So they lost a resource paying for it. They lost more pieces. So, they ended up taking more casualties than the rebellion. And, the rebellion won the day and got to shift the support away from New York and add some opposition. So that affected the difference between support and opposition. And the Patriots got to put a new fort there. I mean, that was just a total disaster for the British. Really, really bad for them. But in any case, that's the end of their turn. And the Patriots are up next. What more can they do? So the Patriots could take the event, or they could take a limited command. Their side of the event says, challenges British naval dominance. Raise FNI 1 level, British resources -3. Well, going to their event or command box, it says, first of all, support is greater than opposition, which it is. An event shifts support opposition in rebel favor. Well, it would, because raising FNI 1 level would blockade a city, which would reduce support. And for clarification's sake, I went to the rule book here, and it does say, including by increasing FNI, but not by free battles. Okay, so that's enough. Raising FNI is enough to make the Patriots select this. All right, so they're going to take the event, raise FNI 1 level, which will cause a blockade to move. And once again, it will go to where we'll have the greatest effect on support. That means New York City. And the British will lose 3 resources. The next card is Edward Hand raids into Indian country. And the Indians are first eligible. Their side of the event says 3 key lieutenants defect. British replace 3 militia with 3 Tories in 1 province. Well, there's only 1 militia on the whole map. And that's in New York. So all this would do is replace that 1 militia with a Tory. Unlikely that the Indians are going to want that. And going down their event or command priorities here, only the last one came into play. Event is effective? Yeah, it would do something. There are 4 more villages on the map? Yes, there are exactly 4. And a d6 rolls a 5 or higher. Okay, so they had to roll on that, but they rolled a 1. So the answer is no. So carrying on, support plus a d6 greater than opposition. Yes, support is greater than opposition. Gather would place 2 or more villages. No, there's no room for a village where there are enough war parties right now. Or a d6 is less than the available war parties. Well, there are no available war parties, so the answer is no. A space has war party and British regulars. No, there's no space like that. Okay, so the Indians want to march. With underground, then active war parties, without moving last war party from any village, moving last 3 war parties where gather can place a village, or adding any rebel control. Okay, so once again, I'm going to mark every piece that can move according to those restrictions, and then we'll see where they go. most of the Indian bots pieces can move, only 2 cannot, because they want to leave at least 1 war party with each village. So they're going to leave 1 behind in southwest and 1 behind in northwest. And they prioritize moving underground first, so they'll leave activated war parties if possible. All right, well, now where are they going to march to? So the second bullet point. If 1 or more villages are available, and they are, march to get 3 or more war parties and 1 additional neutral or passive space with room for a village. Okay, well, there's several possibilities they could choose from. Most of the colonies are at active support or opposition, so those are out. They want to march to a place where they could actually gather to put a village in. So most of the colonies are not going to work, but there are a couple. Maryland, Delaware is neutral, and there's room for a village there. And Georgia is neutral, there's room for a village there. But no other spaces are possible. I mean, New York is at passive, but there's no room for a village there. And there's also room for a village down here in Florida, and there's room for a village up there in Quebec. So those are the possibilities. So they had to choose randomly from among those, and they rolled 5-3, which gave them, Boston, Massachusetts, following it around, Quebec province. So they're going to move, first of all, into Quebec province, but there are 2 possibilities here. They could move the 4 war parties from the southwest, or they could move the 7 war parties plus corn planter from the northwest. They don't have any priorities here, so they're going to choose randomly from those 2 as well to move into Quebec. They rolled a 1-2, which is northwest. So they will move those 7 war parties plus corn planter from the northwest into Quebec. That will be free because they're marching from an Indian Reserve province. The first word, all originating from Indian Reserve provinces, is free. So carrying on with their march priorities here, the second bullet point says in 1 additional, so we're only going to do that in 1 space. We move on to the third bullet point, then to remove most rebel control, first where there's no active support. Well, there's no space where moving war parties could actually remove rebellion control. There are only 2 spaces that are rebellion controlled right now. Well, I mean, the West Indies is rebellion controlled, but obviously the Indians can't march there. New York and New Hampshire. But right now there's no way they could march into there to remove rebellion control. There's only 1 marchable piece from Quebec that activated war party there, which originated in that space, so it was already there. So it could march, like say to New Hampshire, but that wouldn't be enough. And these marchable pieces from the southwest and in Florida, there's no rebellion control anywhere adjacent to those, so that won't do anything either. So that's all the Indians are going to do with their march command. Now they're going to move on to their special activity. They'd like to use Warpath. They do have some resources. They have 3, so they'd want to do this. So it says Warpath, first to remove a Patriot fort, then most rebel pieces within that first in a province with 1 or more villages, then elsewhere. Well, Warpath requires a location with underground war parties and rebellion pieces. And again, there's no such place. All of the war parties are in the Indian Reserve provinces, and there are no rebellion pieces over there. So they're not going to use Warpath. All right, so they'd like to trade after all. If underground war parties at any village, yes. Trade in the village space with the most war parties, first requesting resources from the British. Okay, well, the space with the most war parties is clearly southwest, so they'll activate 1 of those and ask the British for resources. So when the British are asked for resources from the Indians, they follow this procedure. Indian resources are less than British resources, and they are. The British roll a d6, and they did that. They rolled a 3. If the roll is less than British resources, well, the British have 4 resources, so that is less. Offer to transfer resources equal to half, round up, the number rolled to Indian resources. So the British are very generous here. They offer to give half of their resources to the Indians. So they lose 2, and the Indians gain 2. So they've made the Indians richer than themselves. Okay, that's Indian Bot's turn. They took a command in special activity, so the French are next. They can take the event or a limited command. So for the French, we see the sword icon under their faction icon there. So that means they automatically skip the event. So they're going to look for a limited command instead. So French resources greater than 0. Yes, they are at 10. The Treaty of Alliance has been played. A d6 is less than the available French regulars. Well, there are no available French regulars. So no matter what the roll, the answer is no. Rebel cubes and leader exceed British pieces in a space with both. The only space with both rebel pieces and British is Massachusetts. And the rebellion's clearly outnumbered there. So the answer is no. So the French would like to march. And the only priority we're given here for which pieces can march is simply lose no rebel control. So as usual, I'll mark every piece that can move according to these restrictions, and then we'll see where they go. It turns out that all of the French regulars can move. It would have no effect on control to move all of them. Okay, so within that, march with as many French regulars and continentals as possible to add rebel control. First in cities within each first 2 spaces with most British pieces. In an earlier video, I noted that should say, according to the rule book, first in cities, then colonies within each first 2 spaces with most British pieces. That's what it says in the rule book. All right, so they prioritize cities here, and they want to move to they want to take rebel control of a city, and they'll prioritize the most British pieces. Okay, well, March says move regulars to an adjacent space, or if in or adjacent to a rebellion-controlled city, to another rebellion-controlled city or a province adjacent, continentals may accompany French regulars 1 for 1. Well, there aren't any rebel-controlled cities, so that option of traveling through the cities quickly is out. They can only move to an adjacent space. But they want to move to a city and take rebel control. Well, there are 2 possibilities. They could move to Boston from Massachusetts, or they could move to New York City from New York Colony. And clearly the only one that would actually take control would be the move to New York City. The 2 regulars in Massachusetts wouldn't take control of Boston. It would remove British control, but it wouldn't add rebellion control. So the French are going to use their limited command to move their 7 regulars from New York into New York City. And they're going to bring along 7 continentals. They can do that 1 for 1. Which means Washington and Rochambeau will also go along. It also means, by the way, that the Patriots have to pay a resource as well. Any space that continentals enter, Patriots have to pay a resource. So both the Patriots and the French will have to pay a resource for this. Because this is a limited command, that's all that the French can do on this turn. So the next card is Admiral d'Estaing. French fleet arrives, but we can see a winter quarters card is showing. So we will swap these cards and do a winter quarters round. As usual, I will simply give summaries of what happens during each phase of the winter quarters round. So we consider victory first. No faction is at victory. Support, of course, is way higher than opposition, although not as high as it used to be. But so the Royalists are winning in that regard, but the rebellion is winning in the other aspect of victory. Forts, there are more forts than villages, and British have suffered more casualties than the rebellion. Next is the supply phase. The British are first. They elected not to pay for supply in any of the spaces. So they ended up abandoning Massachusetts. They abandoned New York City. They abandoned Maryland, Delaware, and they abandoned North Carolina. All of the other factions' pieces are in supply, so they didn't need to consider removing any of them. The last part of the supplies phase is the West Indies. the West Indies battle. So French must conduct a free battle in the West Indies. Then it says French then British may remove any friendly remaining cubes to available and or pay one resource if any remain. Well, there's no battle going to happen in the West Indies because the French are the only pieces there. But we do have to consider whether or not the French would pay to stay there. So they have to pay a resource if they want to stay. So here on the French bot's handout, the end of French supply / West Indies, pay to keep French regulars in West Indies if possible. Okay, so they will pay a resource to stay there. The resource phase is next. The British gain resources according to the number of forts they have, which is 6, and the population of British-controlled cities that are not blockaded. Because New York City is not in their control, they don't get the 2 population for that. So they get just 6 population for the other British-controlled cities. So that's 12. They're up at 14. The Indians get half the number of villages rounded down, so they got 2 resources. That brings them to 7. The Patriots get the number of forts they have, which is 6, plus half the number of rebellion-controlled spaces, not including the West Indies. Well, they control 4 spaces. So they got 8 resources. That takes them all the way up to 23. They have a lot of resources. The French get the F&I level, which is 1, plus 5 for controlling the West Indies. That's 6. And the population of any non-British controlled cities, which is 2. So they got 8 total resources there. That brought them up to 16. The support phase is next. The British rewarded loyalty in only one space. That was Philadelphia, which was at active opposition, but they spent 2 resources there to neutralize that. And committees of correspondence affected 2 spaces. New York was moved all the way to active opposition. It was at passive opposition before, so they spent a resource for that there. And they spent 2 resources in New York City to eliminate the support that was there. It was hiding underneath that blockade, but now it's been neutralized. So the Patriots spent 2 resources to do that. The redeployment phase is next, and there was a leader change. The French are first eligible on the next card, so Rochambeau has been replaced with Lauzun. And leader redeployment meant all the leaders stayed where they were except for Howe, who moved up to Quebec City. And British release date is irrelevant. All the British pieces are available. And lower F&I. So F&I came down to 0, which meant that blockade in New York City went back to the West Indies. The desertion phase is next. There is only 1 militia on the map, interestingly, in New York. So the Patriots didn't have to remove any militia. But there was 10 Continentals on the map, so they had to remove 2. The Indians got to choose the first one, the Patriots the second one. They ended up choosing randomly from the 2 available spaces and removed 2. Both of them came out of New York. Okay, and then Tory desertion. Well, the British had 12 Tories on the map. The French got to choose the first one. They wanted to remove the most control, so they had to choose between Norfolk and Charlestown, and Norfolk came up. So they removed a Tory from there, and that's now an uncontrolled space. And then the British chose the other Tory. They didn't want to take the last Tory out of a space, and they wanted to change the least control possible. So they could choose between Philadelphia and Savannah. So they chose randomly, and Philadelphia came up. So they removed a Tory from there. The reset phase is next. So all the raid and propaganda markers have been removed from the board. All the factions have gone to eligible. All the casualties were returned to the available box for each faction. All the war parties and militia have gone underground. And we resolved this event. It says India conflict goes the other way. Reduce the larger of cumulative rebellion casualties or cumulative British casualties by half the difference, rounding down. Well, we did that. That made cumulative British casualties come down 1 to 9. So I'm going to end this video here. It's a good place to stop. As usual, if you like this video, please consider giving it a like, subscribe to the channel if you care to, and I'll see you next time.